like my Halloween costume? I sure do. I figured I'd make myself a creator persona for my storytime content. Now then, in the spirit of Halloween, I've decided to tell a couple of my scary experiences. One leaning into the more spooky Halloween theme, and the other more real-world scary. Now let's get to it, shall we? The first story takes place quite a few years back before I moved. I was in youth group, side note. This happened around Halloween time, so the topic of discussion was our personal ghost stories. So that made the whole thing worse. We were about to do our closing prayer when we heard a scream. Now this wasn't a OMG, this is so much fun scream. Nay, this was a blood-curdling scream. The kind you hear in semi-cheesy horror movies. Needless to say, we were thoroughly spooked. So we quickly rushed to finish closing prayer. Shortly after, me and this other girl went and told the youth pastor what happened. I think he said something about it being a test from God, but looking back on it, no, it was probably a prank played by the leaders. Mainly based on how calm everyone was. Now this story, as I said earlier, is more on the real-world scary side, and at the time was a very scary situation, at least to me, so do be warned. Now on to the story. This happened last school year. For context, last school year I was in a vocational class hosted by this micro school that specializes in special needs kids/teens. This school was in what I like to call a rural neighborhood. Basically a neighborhood where people can own horses and whatnot. And another thing about this school is that it had its own bus. Now the class had a schedule. Usually every Friday we would head to the food bank to do volunteer work. So on this Friday, we all piled onto the bus as usual and went on our merry way. I was sitting in the front right behind the driver, so I got a front row seat to the fiasco that was about to happen. I was looking out the window when I started to smell a weird smell. It didn't click for me what it was in that moment, so I just shrugged it off. A few minutes later, I heard one of the teachers, who will be called Miss Jill because I forgot her actual name, somehow yelled that smoke was coming from the air vents up front. I looked over and sure enough, there was smoke. I started freaking out on the inside cause obviously smoke coming from a bus on the freeway is a one-way ticket to Disasterville. Thankfully though, we were about to get off the freeway and there would be a nice place for us to pull over. After a terrifying 5 to 10 minutes, we pulled over and got off the bus. Mrs. K, the one driving the bus, and Mr. M, another teacher who came with, were inspecting the bus engine while Miss Jill stayed with the other students and kept them calm. So we were waiting while Mr. M was inspecting the engine while Miss K was calling the fire department. A few seconds later, I hear Mrs. K yell at Mr. M to get his beard out of there and grab the fire extinguisher. I look over and see Mr. M grab it and give the engine a good dousing. Fast forward to the fire department showing up. They give the engine another good dousing, and after inspecting it, they confirmed there weren't any more fires. After talking for a bit, they leave and Mrs. K rallies the other teachers who stayed at the school to drive everyone the rest of the way to the food bank. Thankfully, the rest of the day didn't have any more problems, skipping to when my mom picked me up. Another thing I forgot to mention earlier is that Mrs. K and my mom are good friends. That's how my mom found about the class in the first place. So Mrs. K tells my mom what happened and said, and I quote, "I need a margarita after all that." At least something like that anyway. Can't say I blame her. So they talk for a bit, then my mom drives off. On the way home, she asks for my side of the story, and I tell her. I happen to have taken a picture of the bus while the fire department were inspecting it. I sent that picture to my sister, and naturally she became very worried about me. As she doesn't see stuff right away, so it took a while for her to respond. She texted me asking if I was okay, and I said yes. And that I just got home. She comes out and asks what happened, and I told her. Sometime after, I asked what started the mess to begin with. They said that most likely a rat made a nest in there using straw from the barn. They kept the engine lit up after that to deter the rats from making another nest, and the bus needed a good deep cleaning to get rid of the smell. So, yeah. Moral of the story is to always have a fire extinguisher and inspect your engine every once in a while, especially if you live in the more rural areas. So those are my stories. What are your thoughts? I'd like to hear them. If you want to hear more stories from me, let me know. And with that, I shall take my leave. Bye!